We sadly live in a world where political uncertainty and rising anti-LGBTQ sentiment are forcing many of us to reevaluate where we can truly be safe and free. For many, the Caribbean may not be the first location that comes to mind as a possible safe haven for our community in the years to come. This is of course understandable, owing to the complicated and often hostile relationship that many countries in this region have had and continue to have with queer rights and people more generally. In fact, a video I made covering this exact subject dives into the 5 Caribbean countries where being LGBTQ remains a crime and where our community should be careful to avoid. But despite these very real and substantial pockets of intolerance and backwards thinking, the encouraging truth is that much of the region is making incredible strides in areas of social development and respect for individual liberties. And in light of the positive trajectory much of the Caribbean is currently on, and the recent events, elections, and uncertainty sweeping large parts of the world, now is perhaps a perfect time to explore the 5 best Caribbean countries for LGBTQ people. We will accomplish this by taking into account data from 2 of the most trusted and thorough LGBTQ rights and public opinion monitoring resources, Equaldex and UCLA's Williams Institute of Law. The scores that each country on this list today receive from both will be combined and averaged out in order to achieve the most well-rounded and comprehensive final score that takes both legislation and general societal acceptance into account. And so, whether one is looking for an ethical and safe place to visit, a new country to call home, or is simply seeking to gain a more informed and data-based perspective on this part of the planet, stick around as we explore the best 5 Caribbean countries for LGBTQ people in 2024. Beginning our journey today, we head to a country situated at the conjuncture of the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Antigua and Barbuda is a single independent country comprised of 2 major islands and has secured the rank of 5th best Caribbean country for LGBTQ rights in 2024. Now, Equaldex has given Antigua and Barbuda a score of 47 points, a number that is heavily diminished by negative public opinion data, despite its legislative situation being quite impressive. Like much of the Caribbean, same-sex relationships were illegal in the country until recently, but in 2022 the High Court of Justice ruled that such discrimination was unconstitutional, a move that highlights the slow but steady expansion of human rights and social development currently being seen across much of the region. Additionally, since 2022, anti-discrimination laws have been in place covering both sexual orientation and gender identity. Thankfully, no censorship laws exist in the country that bar citizens from advocating for queer rights or discussing LGBTQ-related subjects, and while the government currently does not have a path for changing one's legal gender in place, and does not recognize a third gender, gender-affirming care has not been banned and is de facto legal in the country, as is expressing one's gender freely. The Global Acceptance Index gives Antigua and Barbuda a score of 35, on par with countries like Montenegro and Kosovo. A less than excellent score, but still relatively high considering that it has been barely 2 years since same-sex relationships were finally decriminalized in the country. I would not be surprised then to see a rapid rise in societal acceptance reflected in the data in the near future. And so, while there are certainly areas where further progress is desperately needed in Antigua and Barbuda, especially in terms of achieving marriage equality, legal recognition for trans individuals, and improving public opinion among citizens, for now, the country is an increasingly safe and tolerant place for queer individuals, with positive legal and societal changes only increasing. With gorgeous natural landscapes, a favorable climate, and where 80% of the local population is proficient in English, Antigua and Barbuda should undoubtedly be seen as an emerging queer Caribbean icon. It appears that good developments in this country have only just begun, but even now it solidly secures the rank of 5th best Caribbean country for LGBTQ rights in 2024. Moving northwest now, we arrive in a country that is located on the island of Hispaniola, and that borders the failed gang state of Haiti. We are of course speaking of the Dominican Republic, a relatively stable, prosperous, and tolerant country that has secured the spot as the 4th best in the Caribbean for LGBTQ people in 2024. Now, Equaldex gives the Dominican Republic a score of 40, with both the legislative situation and public opinion environment being quite similar. One that is not incredible nor terrible by international standards, but is far above average for Caribbean countries. Since 1822, same-sex relationships have been legal in the DR, which is especially impressive considering that in 1822, all but a small handful of countries in the Americas still outlawed homosexuality. Oddly enough, LGBTQ people are not allowed to serve in the military or on police forces within the DR to this very day, so clearly much work remains to be done. Gender-affirming care has been legal since 1996, but changing one's gender on official documentation is not possible, and no non-binary or third gender is recognized by the government at this time. On a more positive note, the Dominican Republic has had anti-discrimination protections since 2000, and then in 2011, these protections were expanded. But this does not cover housing discrimination, and on this front too, activists conclude that there is room for further progress, as such anti-discrimination laws are not always enforced in the country. But thankfully, no censorship laws exist around the discussion and promotion of LGBTQ rights, and in the years to come, the Dominican Republic will have the opportunity to build upon its past successes and truly make the country an equal and open place for all of its citizens. The Global Acceptance Index gives the DR a score of 50, placing it on par with countries like Croatia and Vietnam. Above average, but still highlighting the work that needs to be done in the area of tolerance in society. The country remains highly religious, where nearly 85% of the population considers religion important to their lives, and where socially conservative views are still far too prevalent among certain segments of the population. But in spite of these very real challenges, this gorgeous country still has so much to offer, and is one of the most stable, safe, and free in its neighborhood of failed states, like Haiti, Cuba, and Jamaica. So, while the fight for true equality has yet to be fully won in the DR, it certainly has earned the rank of 4th best Caribbean country for LGBTQ people in 2024. Moving southeast now, we eventually arrive in Barbados, an island country on the very border of the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean. Barbados is an English-speaking country that gained independence from the UK in 1966, and has since become one of the most successful, wealthy, and progressive countries in the region. Now, Equaldex gives Barbados a score of 63, on par with countries like Taiwan, Thailand, and Ecuador. And while its legislative score is far from ideal at 55 points, Barbados has the highest public opinion rating for LGBTQ people and rights out of any country in the entire Caribbean, which contributes massively to its overall high score, despite having some legal shortcomings. Only in 2022 did homosexuality finally be made legal in Barbados, when the High Court of the country ruled that laws criminalizing same-sex relationships were unconstitutional. Gender-affirming care has been legal in Barbados since 2000, but changing one's legal gender is still not possible, and no non-binary or third gender is recognized by the government. Thankfully, unlike in the DR, LGBTQ people in Barbados are allowed to openly serve in the military and police forces, and since 2020, there have been anti-discrimination laws in place covering employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. But this does not explicitly cover gender identity, nor does it encompass other areas like housing discrimination. So, on this front too, more progress is certainly needed. A 2016 poll found that 82% of respondents from Barbados were against anti-gay and lesbian discrimination, and the Global Acceptance Index gives Barbados a score of 44, on par with countries like South Korea, Latvia, and Lithuania. A score that is perhaps not world-leading, but is certainly region-leading to say the least. And so, for LGBTQ people around the world who love tropical weather and friendly people, Barbados is a Caribbean country that should definitely be on your radar, as it is an excellent place to visit, support, and perhaps even consider as a future possible home, as it is undoubtedly moving in the right direction. Its public opinion score of 71 places Barbados 6th highest in the world by the metric, absolutely obliterating the USA's public opinion score of just 56. So, while the country does have some legal work to address in the years to come, it is already an incredible Caribbean option for our people, and has easily secured the rank of 3rd best Caribbean country for LGBTQ rights in 2024. Moving now to the Northwest, we arrive in a highly controversial pick as the 2nd best Caribbean country for LGBTQ people in 2024, the infamous Cuba. A country known for political violence and oppression, day-long blackouts where even the capital Havana cannot secure electricity, and also known for having its tongue lodged so far up Russia's ass that it's a wonder Cuba can breathe at all. Perhaps every Cuban I have ever met has detested their home country's leadership, and so I do want to make it clear that by placing Cuba in the number 2 spot, based on the data alone, I am not trying to brush over or ignore that the country is a hellscape for the vast majority of its population, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Still, this list is based off of queer rights alone, and in order to not be biased, it is important that I apply the same methodology to every country, regardless of other factors that fall outside of the scope of this particular video. Now, Equaldex gives Cuba a score of 75, tied with countries like France, Austria, and New Zealand. And if this is not impressive enough, Cuba receives high scores in both legislation and public opinion. In fact, Cuba boasts the 7th highest public opinion score on Earth, 1 point behind Barbados, and far ahead of the vast majority of the world. In 2019, 83.8% of Cuban respondents were committed to accepting gay and lesbian individuals, and 79.5% believed that LGBTQ people deserved equal rights. Same-sex relationships have been legal in Cuba since 1979, and since 2022, full marriage equality has been the law of the land after being voted into law by referendum, where 2/3 of the country supported the measure. Gender-affirming care is also legal, and changing one's legal gender is possible, but only after surgery. The government does not yet recognize any third or non-binary gender, so clearly, even on the legislative front, there is progress left to be made. Thankfully, since 2019, Cuba has instituted comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation and enshrined in the country's constitution these protections. And furthermore, since 2016, LGBTQ people have been allowed to openly serve in the military, and no censorship laws exist against the discussion or promotion of queer rights and people. Furthermore, the Global Acceptance Index gives Cuba a score of 58, placing the country just ahead of Israel and on par with Thailand and Taiwan in terms of general societal acceptance. And so, in light of all this, it is simply the case that life in Cuba for queer people is not terrible because of exceptionally high levels of bigotry or government persecution, but rather it is terrible for our community because it is terrible for everyone else too, equally so. This isn't to say that there is nothing positive about Cuba. Idyllic natural areas, great cuisine, and friendly people are only some of the amazing things that Cuba has to offer. But while the country has become a true leader in LGBTQ rights, this does not erase the fact that it is a deeply oppressive country in almost every other way, and one that continues to stand on the wrong side of history with its Russian and Chinese alliances, political violence against opponents to its corrupt regime, and its failings to secure even the most basic public goods and services for its people. Usually, when we look at a map of the world, we see that these negative traits accompany anti-queer mentalities in 99 out of 100 cases. But Cuba is the exception, the 1 out of 100 countries that has somehow aligned with the global axis of evil led by Russia and China, while also embracing quite a socially progressive policy. This is a combination seen literally nowhere else on Earth, and perhaps indicates that once the current regime in Cuba collapses, the country will quickly develop into a free and prosperous nation for all of its citizens. Now, the final spot in this list is occupied by another slightly controversial pick, as it is not a country in the legal sense, but rather is a territory of the United States. Including Puerto Rico on this list was something that I wrestled with a bit, as this is a list focused on countries and clearly does not include other LGBTQ-friendly Caribbean destinations like Curacao or the Cayman Islands, as they are not fully independent. And so, under this logic applied to such non-independent Caribbean islands that led to them not being included on this list, it may seem odd that I opted to include Puerto Rico. But there are a handful of reasons I concluded that doing so was better than not. First off, Puerto Rico is quite literally the best jurisdiction in the entire Caribbean for LGBTQ people, and that fact alone made it seem like a necessary inclusion despite its relationship with the USA. Additionally, unlike other Caribbean islands that are part of the US, UK, or the Netherlands, Puerto Rico is quite large and influential and functions in many ways like an independent country, even though it is still ultimately beholden to Washington. But perhaps most of all is the fact that there is robust data available for Puerto Rico, unlike some other non-independent jurisdictions, and so it was easily possible to include them on this list under its stated methodology. Now, for those who do not think Puerto Rico should be included in a video about Caribbean countries, that is fine. Feel free to take the information in this video for what it is and hopefully find some use from it. I also understand that many seeking to flee the US after the recent election may not find Puerto Rico to be far enough removed from Washington's influence to feel like a safe and viable option. But for other Americans, it will be seen as an accessible and quick option for leaving mainland USA. And the fact that Puerto Rico does enjoy some level of autonomy from the rest of the country should not be fully discounted. But regardless of all these qualifiers and disclaimers, Puerto Rico is without a doubt the best jurisdiction in the Caribbean for LGBTQ people in 2024, and as such, deserves a spot on this list in my opinion. Equaldex gives Puerto Rico a score of 77, meaning that if it were a fully independent country, it would rank 12th in the world for LGBTQ rights overall, with its legislative situation being especially impressive. In 2015, Puerto Rico achieved marriage equality, which made it the first jurisdiction in the entire Caribbean to do so. Gender-affirming care is also legal and accessible in Puerto Rico, and changing one's legal gender can be done without any restrictions. Unfortunately, no non-binary or third gender is yet recognized by the government, but considering the trajectory the island is currently on, this hopefully will be amended in the near future. Anti-discrimination laws covering employment and housing discrimination based on both sexual orientation and gender identity are in place and further cement Puerto Rico as an excellent place to be queer in the Caribbean. Since 2019, conversion therapy has also been banned, which is an incredibly important step that every country and jurisdiction should take immediately, as conversion therapy is essentially the practice of trying to abuse and psychologically alter LGBTQ people into claiming they are no longer queer before being released back into the world. It is often done to children from Christian and Muslim backgrounds by their own families, and is one of the greatest widespread human rights abuses still taking place across parts of the developed world. Thankfully, Puerto Rico has recognized the brutality of such practices even before many U.S. states and countries in the region. Additionally, a 2022 poll found that 87.49% of respondents in Puerto Rico would accept a gay or lesbian neighbor, and a 2020 poll found that over 66% of people on the island had approved of same-sex parents. A recent poll from just last year also found that 79% of respondents believed that Puerto Rico was a good place for gay and lesbian people to live. And these numbers continue to be reflected in the Global Acceptance Index report, where Puerto Rico was given a score of 75, meaning that if it were an independent country, it would rank as the 21st best in the world for societal acceptance of LGBTQ people and rights, ahead of even countries like Brazil, Austria, Argentina, and Portugal. And so, despite this incredible island of 3.2 million not being an independent country, it certainly does deserve recognition as the most queer-friendly Caribbean jurisdiction for all of the reasons mentioned above and beyond. Puerto Rico is home to a vibrant LGBTQ scene, fierce activism for our community, and all of the expected tropical draws that make the region famous and loved the world round. And so, whether you are simply looking for a warm and vibrant vacation destination that aligns with your values, or are perhaps even considering a new place to call home in order to escape some of the craziness much of the world is currently experiencing, I hope this video is a helpful companion to making the data-driven decisions that are best for you. And now, for today's queer news story, we have yet another disgusting development out of Mordor, I mean Russia. Last month, the Russian government passed a bill making it illegal to let parents from countries where gender-affirming care is legal to adopt children from Russia, meaning that now would-be parents from the most developed countries in the world are barred from adopting Russian children, all because of the Kremlin's extreme hatred for trans people and trans rights. See, Russia has one of the world's highest rates of substance abuse and a shockingly low life expectancy for men in particular. This and many other factors combine to make Russia one of the most orphaned countries in the world outside of Africa, as many Russian parents are incapable of caring for their own children or die before they have the opportunity to. The adoption of Russian children into Western families has long been one of the few routes available for them to escape living in inhumane and overcrowded orphanages. But now that parents in most developed and wealthy countries are barred from adopting out of Russia, even more of the country's nearly 1 million orphan children will be doomed to suffer inside the underfunded and understaffed state-run facilities. And while Russia is claiming this decision has been made due to its opposition of trans rights, there may be a deeper reason hidden under the ideological one given. Russia's population is rapidly collapsing due to infertility, poverty, substance abuse, gender imbalance in its population pyramid, immigration out of the country by educated and wealthy Russians, and of course also due to all the death caused by its many overseas wars of aggression, such as the war in Ukraine, where an estimated 800,000 Russian soldiers have already died. All of these factors mean that Russia is losing population at one of the quickest rates in the world, And keeping its orphans inside of its own borders may be a small attempt to slow its rapid decline. Of course, such a move will not have a noticeable impact on the overall population collapse in the country, but will have a lifelong impact on the orphans who are now all doomed to live their childhood in abysmal conditions, only to grow up and be used as further cannon fodder by Putin and his fellow war criminals. And on that sobering note, I want to thank you for spending time with me today as we seek to spread the word about important topics in the community. For those interested, you are more than welcome to stay around and join our increasingly powerful kingdom here on YouTube as we fight for our future. Until next time, QK out.